Good afternoon, all of our guests who are tuning in today to help us honor and celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. My name is Stephen Martin. I'm the Director for Native American Student Services here at Washington State. And I'm very pleased to be introducing our speaker today, Kimberly Blaser. Our title for today's program is Ancient Life, Indigenous Airways, and Survivance. As I mentioned, we are here in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day. Let us understand that for us as tribal peoples, it's more than just a day. But as we go on to recognize the meaning of today and what it means for us as Native people to live our lives, our way of life, every day of the year. Let us understand for this particular day, it's our way of taking back. It's our way of demonstrating and sharing what we are about as Native people, and to expose the truth of Christopher Columbus. We as Native people understand this is not about a day, it's about our livelihoods. As we celebrate this day, we must acknowledge the land which our university sits upon. Let us recognize and appreciate and respect the home of the Indigenous people. I am very grateful to be here representing Native American programs. There are a number of other sponsors that I must recognize at this time as well that helped us bring our speaker here today. Global Connection, Office of Outreach and Education, the Women's Center, Alpha Pi Omega Sorority, Native American Women's Association, Quema. They all contributed to bringing our speaker here today. Our speaker, our poet, Kimberly Blaser, is a past Wisconsin poet laureate, is the author of 5 poetry collections, most recently Popularity, Apprentice to Justice, and the bilingual resistor in its song, Equanimity, Dancing Resistance. An Indigenous activist and environmentalist from White Earth Reservation, she also edited Churches in Blood, Bone, and Stone, contemporary Ojibwe poetry. Her book, Popularity, won the Edna Mead Poetry Book Award and was named one of the best native books of 2019 by the Tribal College Journal. Her photographs, Pictopoems, and ekphrastic pieces have been included in exhibits such as Ancient Life and Visualizing Sovereignty. A professor at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and MFA faculty for the Institute of American Arts in Santa Fe, Blaser is founding director of the literary organization INNAPO, Indigenous Nations Poets. She lives in rural Wisconsin and for portions of each year in a water access cabin near the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in Minnesota. We will discuss a little bit further about copper yearning towards the end of our program. But at this time, I want to welcome our poet, our speaker, Kimberly Blaser, to the program. Thank you for being here, Kimberly.
Uju, Brett, Stephen, and everyone else. I realize right now you're having some feedback, and I understand they're looking into it. I'm going to charge ahead unless I'm told otherwise. So, Uju, everyone, Kim Blaser, Indigenous, Anishinaabe, Kwe, and Dao, Migazi, and Dodem, Gawababi, Bonikag, and Dunjaba. I'm Kim Blaser. I'm Anishinaabe, the Eagle Clan from the White Earth Nation of Northwestern Minnesota. And I'm coming to you today from our remote cabin, which is adjacent to the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northeastern Minnesota. And I'm delighted to be with you. And I send thanks to Washington State University and all of the sponsors of this program. I'm happy to join you virtually on Indigenous Peoples Day, the first such day officially recognized by the US government. And I begin with a poem on disappearance. Beginning with our continent, draw 1491. Each mountain compass point indigenous. Trace trade routes, languages, seasonal migration. Don't become attached. Yes, reshape by discovery, displacement. Move your pencil point quickly now, as if pursued, a cavalry of possession that erases homelands. We shrink in time lapse of colonial barter, disappear. Now draw a brown face painted for ceremony, half a face, nothing. Draw nothing around a crumpled bird body, no wings. Draw emptiness inside desecrated burial mounds, a stretch of absence where fallopian tubes once curved in hope. Sketch void across Buffalo Prairie. Draw the empty of elk, of passenger pigeons, of silver trout. Conjure with your hand the shape of girl blooming. Curves of face, her laughing eyes, you've seen them, postered and amber alerted, missing, evening news, and gone. Draw a woman wrapped in a blanket, a child's body weighted. Draw stones sinking into every river on the map. Draw carrion blackening skies, carrion plucking vision from brown faces. Draw missing, draw murdered. Work carefully now. Turn your hand to the new continent. Again, picture it. Nothing. I think we're good, no echo anymore. But yes, Indigenous nations were targeted by genocidal policies for erasure. We were meant to disappear, to vanish. I celebrate with you Indigenous survivance, survival informed by and shored up by resistance. We are still here. In all we have faced under colonial invasions and rule, our arts have provided continuity, casting an ancient light on contemporary circumstances and feeding our resilience as tribal nations. Now we are in the seesaw of an ongoing pandemic that has devastated Native communities, in an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, in the midst of tragic revelations of mass unmarked graves at boarding school. Who are we when we wake from pandemic? Who are we in colonized America? How is it that we have found ways to flourish? We had the first Indigenous Secretary of the Interior in Deb Haaland, the first Indigenous Poet Laureate in Joy Harjo. In honor of these two strong Indigenous women leaders, I offer this poem, Fantasies of Women. They say there was an old woman who lived in a shoe, children spanking bed, no food. It's an old story, one to rival the Peter Tale, who kept his wife in a pumpkin shell, or Jack Spratt, who coveted all the 90% lean cuts of meat, while his ever-expanding, squat, round wife tumbles over the sides of a tiny kitchen chair, overfilling the page on which she is drawn. We keep turning that page, but one caricature follows another. Some claim women always were the delicate sex, fainting, timid, helpless souls. You know that line. The length and breadth of those whose names have scrambled the letters of femininity into unrecognizable derivations. Annie Oakley, Gloria Steinem, Wilma Mankiller, Rigoberto Menchú, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, in pants or full veil, in every state of dress or undress, Cher's navel, the jewel on Cleopatra's forehead, burn like all beacons of dissent. I heard, a nation is never defeated until the hearts of its women are trampled upon the earth. This one, I believe, for I grew up among women who could swallow a raw heart, whole or in infinitesimal pieces, deer heart, rabbit heart, turtle heart, and did swallow and chew, chew and swallow their own red hearts beating for survival, for survival, for survival, for survival. And this is the single story we write with our lives. Women of travois, ox, or minivan, of African brown barefoot toes, bound Asian feet, or $75 a pop Birkenstocks. Together, we walk our houses of history, track true the paths of indentured servants, girl babies slain and buried, this black dirt of bias exposed, overcome in story cycles of scarlet fecundity, told through the fires of many tongues, and translated again in the labor of women. Now we sing, there was a young woman who lived in a shoe-obsessed, commercialized, overstocked world. She had many children and knew just what to do, raise them to share the burdens of all the people, to unearth the fantastic lies they were taught to walk upon, to devour fear, chew and swallow, and to cast their hearts for survival. So yes, survival, but beyond survival, flourishing. Another of the recent firsts, the first Native-centric television series, Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs. In the midst of ongoing economic and health crises in Indigenous communities, we persist, partly through our arts. What role does art play? Why art? Why poetry, dance, song? What can they teach us? How do they heal and sustain us? So I'm going to share the screen, I hope. Aha, here we go. Here we go. So Joy Harjo, US Poet Laureate, who I mentioned, and she's Muskogee Creek. And in this statement, she suggests that poetry has a role to play in the midst of strife. My role as a poet is as a healer, she claims. Poetry is a healing force. I offer as an example of that kind of healing energy, a poem that I wrote after that 2019 encounter on the Washington Mall between those youth wearing the Make America Great Again hats and the Omaha native Nathan Phillips. And it calls on us to live as our ancestors taught us, to abide in dignity, to seek balance. And this is called On the Dignity of Gestures for Nathan Phillips. Remember hands ungloved and notched by life. Watch them pour stovetop coffee into tin cups, lift cross poles onto fence bucks, mend nets, rock your children. Pay homage and speak the names of sweepers and shovelers, canners, cafeteria cooks, baby doctors, and deathbed watchers. Esme, Dale, Margaret, David, Mike, Colleen. Receive all gifts, crocheted Afghan or prize money, with humility. Gratitude spreads easy as butter. Unworthiness endures. Watch the eyes of turtle. Admire the neck cording of swans. Study wing beats and tail rhythms. Note how otter sows stoop to lift pups. Listen to wind in fall, to trees bending and unbroken. Announce like spring frogs the unfolding of each holy year. Carry candles into cathedrals, poetry into prisons. Do not become beast in the fray. Remember the indigenous hands that drummed on, the man who stood strong. So in the opening and throughout this poem, it calls us to remember hands, speak the names, etc. In the midst of traumatic experiences, remembering is a crucial act. To remember, to put back together the broken parts. Native communities teach this process of remembering, partly through our arts. So if we carry the stories of our ancestors, we know we have been in similar circumstances before. Indigenous people have faced epidemic diseases, faced genocidal actions on the part of colonizers. Our mutual histories include the Spanish flu epidemic of 100 years ago. That history does not make this time less difficult, but we can draw on the teachings and resources we have turned to before. And I suggest that Native arts have always played a role in Indigenous resilience and flourishing, in survivance. Bruce Bernstein claims that Native arts play a central role in health and endurance. Art is why tribes persist. It strengthens Native American aspects of life. Art holds the messages of the past and situates the continuity of the individual and Native communities for the future. Similarly, Quick to See Smith suggests that one can be subjected to many inhumane conditions, but for the survival of the soul, the mind is always free through art. So it's a pathway to freedom. It's a pathway to new vision. And one more. So in the early days of the pandemic, when we were sheltering and all sheltering in place, I was among a group of Indigenous women around the country who began using a vision-born healing tradition that arose during the Spanish flu, the Jingle Dress dance. And Brenda Child, who you see pictured here, has been working with various exhibitions on the Jingle Dress, has written about it as a historian. And she says, because song and dance heal us, art is as necessary as medicine in the worst of times. So the jingle dress was created around 1918, 1920, and it's said to come out of, as I said, that Spanish flu epidemic of more than 100 years ago. And it's a dream-born dress. The vision came to a father whose daughter was ill, and women created the dress and then in ceremony danced for the young girl until, as the night passed, she grew stronger and was able to join them. And so the jingle dress has become known in Native communities and circles as a medicine dress, and the dance itself is often considered healing. Ikwe really means the woman's dance. And in Anishinaabe Moan, the phrase for jingle dress is Zangwegwe Magode, or one of the phrases that we use for the jingle dress. One of the several poems that I've written about the jingle dress celebrates connection to community and also the healing legacy, not only healing for the body, but also for the spirit. This is an ekphrastic poem where the image, that's actually an image of me dancing at the powwow, that little cutout image, but also it's a side-by-side where poetry and language of poetry and image go together and create a third kind of thing. Ikwe dancing resistance. 365 jingles in rows upon my dress, turned by the hands of one who deserted, escaped a mandated pipestone education, 266 miles looking backward for pursuit, hiding from promised punishments by day, migrating like Hmong relatives by moonlight. 365 jingle ribbons hold the jingles to my dress, colorful strips cut, tied and threaded, stitched by the laughing women of my childhood, women who earned $2.25 for piece stitching geese aprons, pot holders, whose stiff fingers tap drum beats to sew by. 365 prayers swing and tap one against another, Zangwegwe Magode, ancient medicine dress, silver-coned legacy, sounding the cleansing voice of rain. 145th White Earth Nation celebration powwow, the weight of Anishinaabe history on my back, a dress made light by resistance, this healing and art. So the jingle dress is, of course, one of the kinds of women's regalia that's worn at powwow and for social dances, but it also has retained this other meaning. And the dance is often used for more solemn occasions. Some say that the dancing is sometimes done in protest. Others understand the dance in a political arena as asking for a different kind of healing. We understand that there can be healing for both physical and spiritual reasons, and that society surely needs healing from maladies like racism. And so I was a part of a community of Native women, singers and dancers who used this tradition as a prayer and a cry for justice after the killing of George Floyd. These next images show you a gathering where we came together at the George Floyd Memorial in Milwaukee, and we did this on a couple of occasions, and we came out to support Black Lives Matter here in this space. So the legacy of the jingle dress is one way that Indigenous art continues across generations and remains viable in new circumstances. It's always being used in new ways. So the focus on Native artways and Indigenous survivance and flourishing is both contemporary and ancient. Contemporary, we are still here. Native nations are still here. And ancient, we continue to make beautiful art from within our oldest traditions. we build on our teachings and bring those ways of living to the world, to the present. Similar to Seven Generations teachings, our Indigenous arts also arise from generations past, but change and adapt in this new age and new circumstances. Physically, they adapt to new materials, and philosophically or in teaching, they adapt to, as I said, new circumstances. As Native people, we have been taught that the beauty of art is a gift that helps us in our living, a gift not to be collected and hoarded, but to be used. And so we wear our beautiful beaded moccasins, we use our birch bark baskets for collecting berries. Our arts are alive. They support us in our flourishing. Today, as in the past, we use our arts to guide our pathways. Stories, songs, ledger art, performances, performance art, all art today helps us navigate the postmodern, hyper-technical, to navigate the challenges of climate change and missing and murdered Indigenous women, identity politics, threats to sovereignty. In all of the circumstances of our lives, art continues to have a role to play. And among those roles is that of seeking change. I believe that a lot of art in this era is art as activism. Paul Chat Smith is a Comanche author and art curator, and he claims artists are deeply respected in the Native world. We ask of them just two things: make fabulous art and lead the revolution. So this is playful, but it's also heartfelt, I think. And I think of poetry in this way. One of my most strongly held beliefs about my aesthetic, about art and poetry, is that it is both affective, beautiful as language or as literature, and effective, that it works to do something in the world. So as I talk about my own art, I hope you are thinking about yourselves as artists and what it is that you do. You know, do you do metal work? Do you do beadwork? Whatever it is that you do, your life is an art. It's an art practice. And all of these things, I think are important to us as we try to continue to flourish in the changing, always challenging circumstances. So among the things that I think poetry and art can do, it can entertain, it can raise awareness, it can teach, call to action. Think of all the Standing Rock art. It can also become prayer. And I often say that poetry is an act of attention. It asks us to look more deeply at our world. Sometimes that gesture, so it's as if it's pointing. That gesture of poetry pointing leads us to discover beauty in the daily, and sometimes it unmasks injustice. So now let me share like a very new poem that I created in response to the discovery of unmarked graves at Native American boarding schools. The title, Plead the Blood, I am using here, ironically. Plead the blood. Now search for stories they have buried like bodies, silence of hidden graves. How we unearth nightcrawler truths, children and words they whispered cot to cot, where dark rituals found them devoured. Oh, holy edifice where robe blessed led, schooled in terror, brown charges. How claim the unnamed from Wendigo territories, bargain in language of tabernacle for sifted earth remnants, lost futures, are stolen restolen. Another example of poetry as activism. This comes from 2016 in Wisconsin, when there was legislation proposed that threatened Native American effigy mounds. And we held a mound action and education event. It was on the coldest day of January, and that's why you will see us dressed as you do. And it was on the lakefront in Milwaukee, and that plaque that I just showed you before marks an effigy mound there. And we performed a group poem. Margaret Newton wrote a song for that moment. Those signs in the background are part of the Overpass Light Brigade, and they spelled out different words of resistance, including Miquendum, which means remember. And I think there's one more. This is another poem that I wrote and performed at that event. Tribal Mound Earth Sutra. And it comes with an epigraph from Alison Hedge-Coke's book, Blood Run, which the whole entire book deals with tribal mounds. And she writes, "Our wealth abounds within what we preserve. We remain wealthy beyond measure, the past ancient treasure we protect. What power resides in earthen mounds? Ancestors, wisdom of clan relatives, astrological continuities, portal to spiritual realities. Effigy of bird, panther, rabbit, bear, this hungry rise of earth imbued with sacred life, monument, transcendent force, name this site holy. Stand with me here, a fragile human thread, Earth Sutra. This curved land, an ageless link, we, a small vibration, one song among the many. Sing this song now, my heritage, yours, shape in consecrated breath, words that mean belong, honor, courage, praise, believe, protect, transform with me here, become in this sanctuary, rich in memory, humble before mystery. Open the medicine pouch of your voice, stand firm together, defend this treasure. Yes, we remain. So those are several of the sort of activist poetry, and the following small poems I'm going to share in image also, either as excerpts or very short poems, also demonstrate my use of poetry as an agent for change. They also showcase a new form that I created that I call pictopoems. So I draw both from Anishinaabe pictographs and dream songs, and also Native American ledger art. And they employ layers of text and image. Most of the photos are mine, and they're, anything from 2 to 5 layers. And the reader viewer then sort of reads and works out the interconnections between these layers by intuiting how they might interact. So in this way, I'm working out of the performance and storytelling tradition of Indigenous cultures, where we make space for the viewer listener to participate in the making of meaning. A storyteller always engages their audience. And so I'm trying to find a way for something that's flat on a page to do the same thing. This first one is a poem that is trying to overcome the myth of individuality. In 2011, in October, before the Arab Spring, I visited the Kingdom of Bahrain, and the tension was high, and the writers I met were already writing resistance. So when demonstrations broke out and protests broke out around the world, those in Manana, the capital city I had visited, the resistance workers there gathered in Pearl Square, and Pearl Square was right below the hotel window where I had stayed. So during that time, college professors that were known for their quote unquote revolutionary tendencies were pulled from their homes. At night, doctors who treated the injured protesters were arrested or disappeared, and poets came under fire. One young 20-year-old woman was arrested, tortured, and imprisoned for reciting a poem that was said to incite revolution. And so I wrote this poem in solidarity and in recognition of the universal losses in the memory of all of the disappeared. Unlawful assembly. Don't hurry to safety. Each hour your flowered room grows smaller. Everywhere at the periphery of vision, windows shatter into triangles of mosaic light. There, in the lonely fragments, a YouTube dictator declares victory. Blood flattens and darkens, the scent of rebellion, smoke, fire, and ash, all pungent in the still images sacrificed to history. Somewhere, the flapping door of an overturned wagon thumps steadily in a deserted street, echoes absent hands. And so it is truly for those absent hands that I wrote that poem. This is an excerpt from a longer poem and really a series of poems written in which I respond to that ongoing challenges of mining and the ecological devastation and threats to our environment, especially our water, and also to the crooked thinking that doesn't understand the concept of reciprocity, that doesn't see the sacred in our natural world. And so this comes, midway in a longer poem, but I put the language here on this polluted water. And I speak of the eloquence of Aki, and Aki is our earth. How do we translate the flashing fins of poisoned fish? What other alphabet do you know to spell contaminated waters? Like banned books, words still burn on my tongue. Reciprocity, sacred, preservation, earth, tradition, knowledge, protect, even the vellum of justice, disdained, crumpled in quick, greedy fists. Meanwhile, we gather here, descendants of Ajijak and Mound, lift our ancient clan voices in longing for a chant of restoration in a Faustian world. Those of you who may not be literature majors, that's alluding to that bargain that someone made. I will sell you my soul, and here we are selling the soul of our land. That's what that Faustian world alludes to. This is another example of a pictopoem, and it uses the image. This is not my own. This is a historical image from the Western History Collection at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. And this poem for me addresses that kind of photographic capture, that collecting of the vanishing Indian of myth. And so in the photo, if you notice that the woman in tribal dress is seated at this ornate Victorian chair, but she's also, there's literally a frame in the photo, and she's breaking out of that frame. Her arm and her very long hair is is placed so it comes outside the frame. And I like to see that as her resistance to stereotyping. So I call this framing, and I'm trying to also visualize the action in the way that the words tumble off the page. An Irwin Brothers Indian posed in a studio photograph, a file number in a Western history collection of classic invented identities, solemn face, long dark hair, just another sepia memory with reality leaching away like a winding red stream from a cracked inkwell. The irony of American Gothic, a lone Comanche woman perched on an ornate Victorian chair. But this Ogechi Dakwe breaks out, her wavy waist-length hair deliberately draped over one corner of a large wood frame, reaches beyond the captured image, hair so full it runs down across her chest, joins the dark of her layered skirt. Together they become the swift pony on which she counts coup, rides her escape from the still life, the Catlin Curtis colonized lookalikes, Mashit, warrior woman, Aniwewe Batu, run away, making noise. Just checking my time here. I'm going to probably skip a little bit here. So the next images are also the additional pictopoems, and I won't read them. I'll just show them to you as we pass. So this one is a visual rendition of an earth diver story in which the image suggests that sort of surreal, that, you know, it's literally a beaver in here, but it's calling up all of the earth divers of that story. And the poem, with English on one side and Anishinaabe Moan on the other, those two facing one another, become itself another image of a diving water animal. And this second pictopoem involves, as the title Captivity suggests, stories about stereotyping, racial profiling, jailing of Native people, etc. This one is, it arose from a moment of what I call transcendence. While my daughter and I were visiting cliff dwellings at the Bandelier National Monument in New Mexico, and the sun came out and cast her shadow into the image of a cliff dwelling. And it just made me tingle and think about the way that we lean into and are formed of our past. And there is this way in which the stories inhabit us. And so the language of the poem is about that. And it is the canyon wall, her looking into the cliff dwelling. And the one thing I want to point out here is, do you see this do not copy? That is meant to be ironic, playful, saying you cannot own or copy a canyon wall, etc. Okay. This one is, it alludes to the story of how birch bark trees got their markings, but also it simply celebrates the Migizi clan or the Eagle clan and our dream realities. It's meant to be kind of a dream image. I wanted to share just a couple of this visual art from other Indigenous Native artists, and I selected just a couple of examples. One that showcases resilience and survivance. This first is through another important element of Native artways, which is humor, right? We often use a trickster in literature, we use trickster humor, and here we have James Luna's, who recently passed away. We have an example of his performance art in which he puts himself on display and masquerades as an Indigenous body on display. So this is simultaneously, again, playful and powerful, and it's an act of survivance. This one is, unsettling. It's by Rebecca Bellmore, and it's another example of art as an act of resistance. Here she's, giving us a reminder of the violence against Native women. And this is just so haunting. I just think that's so haunting. Before I move to my conclusion, I just want to speak briefly about the other intention of my work. And that is to invite spiritual connection. In many ways, my work is calling the viewer listener to an other way of seeing or to an other way of being in the world. And let me see if I have what I have here for us. Okay, part of the way that I do that is I do that sometimes with my photography, and I shake up the angle and perspective. So I invite this this other way of thinking about what we see. So what is the proper way of seeing or understanding our encounter with the world? And so I often use reflection or refraction. And this is one example of that. It's a reflected image, but look how cool it is. And when you are in water and you look into the reflection, you sometimes just lose yourself, and that you almost fall into reflection and are swallowed by it. It's so amazing. This is another example of that. And this one actually asks the question, which I often ask without speaking it: which side of vision is mere reality? One of them's just reality, the other is more than that. That's my suggestion. Which side of vision is mere reality? And this poem, this pictopoem, is one that you saw ahead of time. And oftentimes, my own experience of the natural world arises from it as partly, I guess we would say, imbued with a tribal context involving tribal connections, tribal continuance, spiritual continuities, a cultural framework of origin stories, of ceremony, ritual. So in a true or successful rendering of natural places, I hope that they come alive as native spaces. And that's what I'm working here. The Lakota artist Colleen Cutshell speaks of drawing where the seen and unseen come together to form the narrative. And I find that inspirational. And Dene storyteller Yellowman spoke about the role of Native creative works and say they allow us to envision the possibility of things not ordinarily seen or experienced, and to use the intangible part of our thinking mind. So I too endeavor through image, presentation, content to insinuate that animate other reality, the interconnected reality of tribal experience. And I create toward that sensibility by, it's a kind of a certain slant of knowing. So the pictopoem Ancient Light began with a great blue heron flying through the blue sky. It was taken, the photograph just of the blue heron was taken on a canoe paddle with my son in the Horicon Marsh in Wisconsin on Mother's Day. And we spent, 10, 15 minutes watching this great blue heron stalk fish, catch and swallow them whole. We watched it fly, great pomp and lift off and so on. And it had sometimes had this great yellow belly gigoo in its mouth. So the feeling of that encounter for me was like rapturous. It was. And yet when I printed just that image, it seemed anemic or only like half of what I experienced. And I couldn't quite understand because the position of the bird is really stunning. It's got that huge wingspan. The wings are curved, tipping up. Its neck is in that classic curve. Its legs are extended. Its feet are pointing out to forever here, right, in the image. And yet I realized that what I thought what I experienced and what I saw was not what the camera captures. It's that we always experience in the context of our own understandings and beliefs. And so that great blue heron had flown through the territories of Anishinaabe ontology and mythology, and like as Ajijak, the Crane clan, the echo maker, the totemic figure of the Crane clan. And I wondered, how could I make that image suggest the same kind of reality? And so I put Anishinaabe floral beadwork together with snatches of language, including its name in Anishinaabe-Moan, Jashagi. And ultimately, the companion poem also searches for a way to give voice to that encounter, to the knowledge that Native spaces still exist in our everyday landscapes, that understanding of how readily we all inhabit them. And so just because of time, and I want to get to well, I guess this is a very short poem. Okay, I'll go ahead and quickly read this poem, and then you read the poem with me, and then I'll take a couple questions. Oops. Okay. Ancient light, curves of this woodland sky, a fissure in the propriety of reason. Behind you, ancient light enters. Stitched here is first translucent, sun turning the hose of your throat to a vessel of fire, body angled like a sundial against the cup of all reluctance, our rock cold clan longing. This silence, release now from the weighted anchor of time. Your voice, a torch of language, jashagi, the flame of your tongue gives light. So partly, if you've ever heard them call, or, just if you've ever seen the sun shine through their throat, you can see their tongue all the way down. Okay, so finally, there's so much more to say, more poems, more image, more stories. But for now, I want to close by asking you to perform with me this prayer poem, which is to Nibi, or to water. So on the White Earth Reservation of my childhood in northwestern Minnesota, I grew up in really rich water country, and my family spent nearly every weekend of my early life, sometimes took me from school for fishing, swimming, skating, setting nets, spearing, ice fishing, harvesting wild rice. So we knew water as provider, as well as the home of the great underwater panther, Mishubishu. Water for us did not come from a faucet. We collected rain. We pumped our drinking water from the belly of the earth. We hauled it from springs in cream cans in the back of my uncle's pickup. And our daily household water was a pail and a dipper. So because water came through labor, we didn't waste it. Because our life was linked to water, we knew it as a relative. Because stories told us how cycles of women and moon are tide-driven, we understood water's power and its mythic truth. So my Anishinaabe culture arises and exists in a cosmology of Nibi, a cosmology of water. We call it Midday Nibi, sacred water. And we're taught to honor water with songs, prayers, and offerings, and to live gratefully, aware of our dependence, because we carry the burden of continuance. The world cannot continue unless we share the burdens of reciprocity. So I invite you to now join me in honoring water. And if you have the handout, look at the highlighted lines. And if you don't have the handout, I'll gesture to you. And when I do, speak these phrases. The first is spirit of water. And the second is nagamo zagama, which is the same in Anishinaabe Moan, it's spirit of water. So try it with me. I may not be able to hear you, but I'm counting on you actually speaking. Sing, spirit of water, nagamo, zagama. Okay, I'm hoping you're out there. A song for giving back. The benediction of water begins with the holy whoosh, 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 whoosh of womb sounds. This ancient amniotic language, our first song. Like earth afloat in a great weeping cosmos, we fetal beings suspended in sublime liquidity. Yes, name water the primary principle, sacred originating material. Sing our aqueous blood belonging as what we bless blesses us. Sing, spirit of water, nagamo zagama. Born in the deep, wet heart of science, we tell of water, the granite language of earth, the holding and being held, the cabinet of rock bodies seeped through, this spilling, that the nature of all creatures is moist, that all who hold with science or spirit must hold also with change, liquid to ice, ice to vapor, and back, the cycle, sung motion of our lives. Sing, spirit of water, Nagamo Zagama. I'm going to ask you to do that one more time with me, and we'll just call that the end of that poem. Sing, spirit of water, Nagamo Zagama. There's more which you can do on your own. And so I am going to finish sharing.
We are here at the part of, we are going to be taking questions at this time. So is there anybody in our audience that would like to present a question to Ms. Kimberly Blaeser? You want to explain that, Stephen?
Yeah, just asking.
Kimberly, I was asked if you could expand on the Indigenous Nations poet.
Absolutely, sure. So just before the start of the pandemic, I started Indigenous Nations Poets, which is an organization that is meant to support Native writers and especially to mentor young writers. And so right now we have been working on getting our feet on the ground, getting a website, we've done several programs, but the big thing that's coming up is we are going to have a mentoring retreat in Washington, DC, the last week of April 2022. And our current US Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo, will be there with us for the whole week. And it will be a time where there will be people who will do readings. There will be workshops where we work with writers on, developing their writing. We'll visit with some of the organizations in DC. We're going to be at the National Museum of the American Indian several times. So we have a really cool program that we're planning. And very soon, I'm hoping, like maybe the end of October, at the very latest, beginning of November, there's going to be an announcement on our webpage where Native writers can apply for fellowships to attend as this mentoring retreat. So they become fellows, and then their way will be paid to be a part of that first mentoring retreat. So that's kind of the story on that. As we expand, we've done a lot of programming, as I said, in different places, but we are also going to do other kinds of, workshops and, some publishing, offer some competitions. Actually, there was a competition offered last year with another organization. So all of those things, just different ways to support young writers. And so just keep an eye on that on our webpage.
Thank you, Kimberly. If you need additional information, again, there's a handout on the tables that you can get some of that information from. If you want to speak about it to Native American Programs or Women's Resource Center, please do so, and we can get you connected as well. I don't think, Kimberly, we have any questions at this time, and I know that you want to end with one of another poem of yours, but I do want to plug your book or your works, Copper Yearning. For those of you who are interested in Kimberly's work, Copper Yearning, please check with the Women's Center. I do believe we have some complimentary issues to give away to our students. Check that out. But I wanted to read something about that book as I was looking through these different reviews. And one of them said, these exquisite poems immerse us in various worlds and generations to remind us that stories and memories shape our lives, not just that of humans, but also rocks, trees, fish, birds, frozen lakes, dense woodlands, oceans, the skies, and all life forms. It gives voice to the spirits of place, animals, and ancestors that accompany us still. And I wanted to read that particular review because I think that's, as you were reading your poetry today, that's what I felt, and I'm sure many of our audience members felt that as well. So I want to thank you for your beautiful words. Thank you for your gift of art and poetry. Thank you for bringing the life of the ways that we live by in our Native communities. Thank you for bringing a better understanding and teaching to the issues that exist through your poems, through your words, through your lines. It was a beautiful way for us to visit with you and to help honor Indigenous Peoples Day, but not just for today, but just for our way of life forever. So Kimberly, it was awesome to hear you speak. Glad to be able to form another relative with you. So thank you. And I'm going to end with that, and I'm going to give you the final seconds or minutes to let you express your poem.
Okay. Regrets for that, Stephen. That's so lovely. I appreciate it. And, you know, it's great to be with you this way. I would be nicer to be in person, and someday we'll be back to that, I'm sure. So for the moment, some of the people who are organizing this know that in my family, we just lost someone recently. And I know that we've all lost people during the pandemic in Native communities. And so this poem is a poem I offer for all of us as we've tried to deal with that loss. Afterwards, because the smallness of our being is our only greatness, because one night I was in a room listening until only one heart beat, because in these last years I've worn and nearly worn out my black funeral shoes, because the gesture of afterwards means the same thing no matter who speaks them, because faith, belief, forever are only words, no matter, because matter disappears always and eventually, because action is not matter, but energy that's spent changes being. And if death too is a change of being, perhaps action counts. And if death is a land of unknowing, perhaps we do well to live with uncertainty. And if death is a forested land, it would be good to learn trees. And if death is a kingdom, it would be good to practice service. And if death is a foreign state, we should loosen allegiance to this one. And if our soul leaves our body, then we must rehearse goodbye. Miigwech.